Hello and welcome to the Effects Loop. I'm Jay Byrne. I'm going to be your host for this. This is going to be a bit of a talky series, but I think I want to bring you through my history with guitar amps. When I shifted from that, I still was on the digital plane. I was like, you know what? I want to have a lot of different sounds and a lot of different effects. So I actually went out and bought myself a Helix. I had a Line 6 Helix, the LT. Not the full one, but the LT, the step down one, which still had everything that it needed to do. That thing was amazing. That, honestly, I've sold that since. I kind of wish I still had it. I've used that for a lot of things. Actually, for my movie Determination Never Ends, if you watch all of my guitar tracks for that movie were recorded using the Line 6 Helix Direct, because it was the easiest way to record those guitar tracks and for me to set up patches and all the different effects that I needed for the different songs and whatnot. And it worked. It worked fine, actually. But I mean, like I said, I didn't have an amp anymore. Now it was just I was running through studio monitors, and I'm like, I wanted an amp. So at that point, I decided, well, you know what? I really like the Line 6, so I think what I'm going to do is I want to get the power cab. So I ended up getting the Line 6 power cab. And I had two versions of the power cab. I had the simple version, and I had like the slightly better version of the power cab. I forget what they're called. Power cab Plus, I think, was the better version. You could change it to, like, a greenback or a Jensen, or it had a swamp thing in it. Swamp Thang, I think, is what they called it, actually, which is funny. And a couple other speaker types that were in it, actually, and they kept adding to it. I mean, they still make them, and they're really good. I mean, if you've got a Helix, honestly, I think the best thing to have for the Line 6 Helix is the power cab. Like, I started watching that pedal show, and I actually got into Rhett Shull a little bit around that time. And I was watching his stuff, and I really like watching his stuff, and I love that pedal show, the guys from that pedal show. But I started watching those shows, and like, it got me into the idea of pedals and an amp and real amps and pedals and tube amps and that kind of stuff. So from that point on, I wanted to get a tube amp. So I ended up going and I bought because I was always limited to only, like, $1,200 or so. Like, I couldn't really, and that was a lot. Even then, I couldn't really go any higher than that. So I ended up with an Orange Rocker 32, which was a stereo, 210 stereo tube amp from Orange. It was dedicated stereo, very much like the Roland Jazz Chorus that I have now, the 40. It was a dedicated stereo. That sucker was heavy, and that sucker was loud, like so loud. Oh my god, it would blow your freaking ears off. And it was hard to tame. The clean channel actually wasn't half bad, and the distortion channel was more along the lines of a Black Sabbath-y kind of distortion. What was kind of nice about it is if you hit it with like an SD1, you could kick the distortion down, hit it with like a Boss SD1, and you could get a really nice rock metal distortion out of it. But I mean, you had to be playing at blisteringly ear-splitting volumes, and it was brutal. Like, on my ears are just not what they used to be from all these years of playing guitar, and it just, I couldn't take it for that long period of time. It just, my head couldn't handle it. At that point, I had decided, well, I always wanted to have, because when I had the Helix, the Line 6 Helix, one of my favorite presets in the Line 6 Helix for clean and whatnot, to get a nice sound out of it, was a Fender Deluxe Reverb. I wanted a Fender Deluxe Reverb really bad. So I'm like, I'm going to get this Fender Deluxe Reverb, and I still had the Orange at the time when I got it. I think I ended up selling the Orange at some point to kind of help pay for the Deluxe Reverb. I got one of those, and I had a real tube Fender Deluxe, and I love that amp. That amp sounded awesome. I found myself using that amp all the time. I mean, I was using it with pedals, and I was loving it. Like, it was great. I mean, if you ran I used to run some distortion pedals into the normal channel, and it just sounded really good. You get some really good sounds out of that, and I played that thing to death. I played it, I had it for about a year, and then it started acting up again. Freaking tubes, man. I started to have problems again, and I think the tubes are crapping out on it. And I probably would have, but I was a little concerned that it was more than just the tubes. I think there was a problem with the tube sockets, because I had done some research on those amps, and there was a thing that happens with the tube sockets on those, where they can, like, the socket can start to crap out, and it gives you this problem with the speaker, and you get this weird high-end fizziness to it, and that's what I was getting. Like, all of a sudden, it was like, it sounded like garbage. It started to sound like crap. And I had one tube that was going down, I could tell from the back. And I didn't know how to change tubes or bias tubes at the time, and I was uncomfortable with the notion of doing it. I decided, I have a Fender, I really like this Fender. I always wanted to have a Marshall. So maybe if I had a Fender and a Marshall. So then when I sold off the orange, the Rocker 32, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a Fender and a Marshall and an orange Rocker, and I'm going to get rid of this orange Rocker 32. And I was like, what am I going to get for a Marshall? I honestly didn't know. I mean, I wanted a JCM 800, because who didn't want a JCM 800? If you were into the kind of music and the style of stuff that I was playing, I really wanted a JCM 800, but I'm like, I can't afford a JCM 800. So I ended up getting the Marshall, the DSL 40 CR. I got one of those from Guitar Center, which of course was damaged, because everything I bought from Guitar Center, even if it was new, was damaged for some reason. And it was really freaking annoying, actually. It was getting frustrating. This whole process was getting frustrating and driving me frickin' nuts. But I got the DSL 40, and I liked it, and I thought it sounded really good, and I was pretty happy with it. But it had a problem with the on and off light, and I'm like, this is something wrong with this. They didn't have anything else to exchange it for, so I returned it, and I told my wife, you know what? I'm just gonna go out. I'm gonna get myself a JCM 800. And at the time, it was new. They were they were just coming out. They were the Marshall, the Studios, the JCM 800, the JC. I think it's called, what was it? It was called a SC20 JCM 800 Studio, and it came with a 212 tall cabinet, which comes to V-type speakers, actually, Celestion V-types in it, and I had that. And that thing sounded pretty freaking sweet. It sounded awesome. Because I had that, and I had the Fender Deluxe Reverb at the time. And honestly, I probably could have just stuck with that and never gotten anything else. But I got into this weird pattern of, like, I started having problems with the Deluxe Reverb, so I was kind of ticked off about that. And then the JCM 800 sounded good, but it only sounded good when it was, like, freaking ear-splittingly loud. Like, at low volumes, it was just, could be a fizzy mess. So I started with the attenuators. I started buying attenuators. I had a couple different attenuators that I messed around with. But then again, I had a tube problem with the JCM 800 Studio. And at least those particular amps were, what do they call them? Like they bias themselves. Like they're self-biasing. I don't remember all the terms for it at this point. So, I can't remember what they're called. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But regardless, it was easy to change out the tubes. You could just roll the tubes out in that amp. You could take cathode biased, I think is what they call it, actually. It's cathode biased. So I could, as long as I replaced it with a matching pair, I could replace it. So I got some new tubes for it, and I popped some new tubes in it, and it seemed to be working okay for a while. Then my Fender Deluxe Reverb finally crapped out, and I said, the hell with this, and I sold it because I just was sick and tired of dealing with it. I was upset. That bummed me out because I really liked that Deluxe Reverb, and I was like, whatever. What am I going to do, right? Screw this. At that point is when I started juggling the katanas. Because I wanted something, I wanted to get something that I could do cleans, like the Deluxe Reverb, that had a decent clean tone and stuff. So I started with the Katana 50, which I have another one now, which I've actually kept. And then I went to the 100. And then I went to the Artist. And I didn't really like the Artist so much. I feel like I want to get the Artist back and give it another chance. But at the time, the speaker was way too dark. It was literally, when I brought it home and plugged in and started playing with it, I thought it was broken. Like, it was so muffled and muddy sounding. I'm like, why does this sound so muddy? Because the 50 and the 100, the 50 was the brightest, but the 100 was still bright enough. It wasn't like Mud City, but the Katana 100 was like Mud City. And at this point, you got to remember, I've got a JCM 800, and I've got a Katana, actually, at this point, is what I had. I had the JCM 800 and the Katana. And it was a weird mix of amps, and I'm like, this is just odd. And I was sick and tired. I was getting so sick and tired of dealing with the whole tube thing. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I started trying different things. I ended up getting a Roland Blues Cube stage. I sold off the JCM 800. I got the Blues Cube stage. I had the Blues Cube stage and the Katana, actually, at the same time, I think. And I'm like, well, you know what? I'll just go solid state with this stuff. What the hell? I'll just try to get some... And the Blues Cube stage actually sounded really good, but it had problems with the input jack. It was freaking broken. I got it brand new, too. And the input jack was whacked on it. And I'm like, what is with these freaking broken amps? I just keep getting amps, and they just keep breaking, and like... It was really freaking annoying. And this was actually, at this point now, we're up to like 2020-ish, okay? So this is during the pandemic. Like, during like the heart of the pandemic. I mean, it's still technically still going on, I guess. But I mean, now I guess it's, what do they call it? Endemic now? It's just something that's going to be with us forever. Well, I'm not even going to get into that. But, this was during the height of that pandemic era where everyone was worried about things, and so I was having things shipped to my house, and you know, they were showing up broken. Occasionally I'd get myself out to a Guitar Center if one was actually open and not shut down and closed at the moment. I couldn't really look at stuff, so I was just researching all this stuff online and then ordering it and then trying it out. And I had the Katana Artist for a while, and then the Katana Artist, it was just muddy and gross, so I ended up getting rid of the Katanas. Katanas were gone again. I was like, you know what? The hell with the Katanas. I'm not dealing with all this digital crap. The hell with the Katanas. The Roland Blues Cube I actually liked. So I was like, you know what? I want something like this that I can play, that I'm going to enjoy, and this and that. I went through the gamut with the Tone Masters, because the Super came out, the Super Reverb, and I'm like, I always wanted a Super Reverb. Like, Super Reverbs are really cool. So I'm like, I want a Fender Super, but it's too loud to have a real tube one. So I got the Super Reverb, and I love that amp. That amp was great. The Fender Super Reverb Tone Master was awesome, and I used it for a while. It was a little too... Like, I found that with pedals and stuff, I'd have to crank it a little too loud to get, like, a nice sound out of a pedal. So I had that for a little while. The Roland Blues Cube, the Blues Cube went back. This is starting to get confusing now. The Blues Cube went back. I had that amp. And so I went and I got myself a DSL 40 CR again. And I had the DSL 40 CR and the Fender Super Reverb Tone Master. And honestly, those two amps together were kind of perfect. Although, the same thing, the DSL 40 CR actually was fine. There was nothing wrong with this particular one. But they're known for having issues with their foot switches, and they eventually close. I never plugged the foot switch into it because I was afraid it was going to like wreck the amp and give me a problem, because there's supposedly an issue with the foot switches on those amps where it can mess something up inside the amp, and then you start having problems with the amp. Once you start using the foot switch, your switching starts acting up and like switching on its own and acting up. So I never bothered with the foot switch on that amp because I was kind of afraid to use it. And I had that for a little while with the Super Reverb, and all was kind of good for a while, but yet again, it was too freaking loud. The DSL 40 was too loud. And I'm like, oh, I need something. So I got rid of the DSL 40. I got a Fender Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. The Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. So I had the Deluxe Reverb and the Super at the same time. And the Deluxe Reverb was actually kind of nice because it was small and light, and you could, that thing could go quiet and you could play it, and it didn't sound half bad. But I was running pedals through it, and it just, I wasn't getting a lot of life out of it. It was just kind of flat. I could get a little bit better with the pedals on the Super Reverb, but there was something missing with the pedals. I was having an issue with those amps and the pedals. There was just something missing with them. So I had the Deluxe for a little while, actually returned it. This is all I'm using, this was like the Guitar Center, this is the Guitar Center Renner Center years, let's call it that, where literally I'd have this stuff for like 45 days and then I'd return it and get something else. A few times I kept it longer and I had to actually sell it back and use the credit towards something else, to get something else, so I could actually get a different amp. At that point, we get into the point where the tube shortages started to happen. The whole thing with the Ukraine-Russia thing started, and because this is more recent, past couple of years, and we start getting into people are saying that we're not going to be able to get tubes anymore. So I'm like, I got a tube amp here. I'm like, what happens if I can't get tubes for this amp? I'm like, I've got a solid state and I got a tube. Do I really need to have tubes? Is it really a big deal for me to have a tube amp? So I started researching, and I ended up with the Orange Super Crush 100 because I heard those were pretty good, and I figured I could get a decent Marshall-y kind of sound out of the Orange because it was supposed to sound close to like a rock reverb. And so I got rid of the DSL-40, and at that point I had the Orange Super Crush 100 and the Fender Super Reverb. And we're almost up to current times here. We're almost there. We're getting there. The Fender Super Reverb. And those two amps together were pretty good. Honestly. They were not bad. But there was something about the Orange Super Crush 100 I kept getting like having issues with it. It kept like there were things about it like just I didn't like the clean channel. The clean channel was just muddy. Like it wasn't clean, it was muddy. It was dark and muddy, and like you couldn't get that nice chime out of it. And this is coming from a person who really got used to a Fender Deluxe reverb with that nice chimey tone, and I couldn't get anywhere near that kind of tone out of the clean channel, and that's kind of bumming me out. I was like, the distortion was fine, but it was a one-trick pony. I could hit it with a SD1 or something like that and get a halfway decent distortion out of it. But what I also ran into problems with that is if I started stacking too many effects and using the effects loop, I was getting a lot of noise and it would be muddy, and it wasn't a clear sounding amp. It was bassy and muddy. That's the only way I could describe it. Bassy and muddy. I mean, it could be bright, but then it would be like harsh bright. It had a Celestion speaker in it that was like 150 watts or something like that. And the thing was pretty heavy for a solid state amp. But once again, it just started not working for me. I got it in my head that I wanted to try, because I wanted a solid state amp, but I wanted a solid state amp that was a legit solid state amp that I didn't have to update in a computer with and it didn't come with 10,000 different effects that I had to kind of adjust and update and this and that. So I ended up selling the Fender Super Reverb. Even though I love that amp, which was stupid of me, but I sold it. And that's when I got the Roland JC40. So I had the Roland JC40 and I had the Orange Super Crush 100 at that point. And I just started to realize at that point that everything I was getting out of the Orange Super Crush, I could easily get out of the Roland JC40 with pedals. Used pedals in the Roland JC40 and it sounded so close to the other amp. They were so close in sound quality that I'm like, why do I need these two amps? It's totally redundant. There was like no reason for me to be having those two amps side by side. They felt completely redundant to me. Like I felt they were like the JC40 was interchangeable with the Orange Super Crush. However, the Orange Super Crush couldn't really do what the JC40 did. So then I was like, you know what? I don't need this Orange Super Crush. So I got rid of the Orange Super Crush. And at the time, I was going through different guitars. That's a whole other journey, swapping out the guitars. But at the time, I just realized this Roland JC40 is good enough. And for a good couple of months, I had nothing but the Roland JC40. Actually, when I started making this effects loop channel, my first video, I did the Roland JC40 in my first video. I didn't have any other amp but the Roland JC40 and pedals. That was the only amp that I had. Because I had gone through this whole journey. We'd come all the way around, all the way back down here in this journey. And here I was with the Roland JC40 at the end. And I'm like, you know what? I'm happy with this amp. This amp is good. I'm enjoying this amp. And I had that for a while, and I just learned how to use it. And it sounded good to my ears. And it didn't bother me. But then, as with everything else, I started thinking to myself, like, if I was to have another amp, if I needed more than one amp, which nobody really does. You don't need more than one amp. I mean, as long as you can find, if you want to do different things, maybe sometimes, but with a good pedal platform clean amp, you don't need more than just one. And you just buy a bunch of pedals, distortions and whatnot, and then you can make whatever sound you want, you can pretty much get. Maybe it's not exactly the same as a Marshall, or it's not exactly the same as an Orange, or it's not, but it's pretty darn close, and most people aren't going to notice the difference. So at that point, I decided, I wanted a little practice amp, something that, like, if I didn't want to plug into the JC40 because it's a little heavy, and I don't have a lot of room in my apartment, so it's not always plugged in. I kind of gotta kind of play it and then put it away when I'm done. So I wanted a practice amp. So at that point, I decided, you know what? I went through the journey with the Katanas. I actually liked the Katana 50. Out of all of them, the Katana 50, if you were just buying it for a practice amp, if that's all you wanted it for was a practice amp, then the Katana 50 was perfect. It was perfect for that. It did what it was supposed to do. It wasn't an issue. Like, and you load the effects in via the computer, but then you don't have to mess with it. You can just leave it alone, and it's not. As of right now, as I'm making this video right now, I just realized my computer is broken, and I can't even access the tone software for the Katana that I have over here. But it's okay, because the effects that I use mainly are loaded into the Katana, and I don't really feel the need. I literally just updated it like a couple days ago before my computer died. I put up I changed around a few of the effects that I normally use, and I pretty much have everything that I like in it. So I don't really even need to update it right now. So that's the least of my worries when it comes to the computer. I'm more worried about keeping up with the channel and stuff like that as far as the computer is concerned. But that's just my plug and play amp. Like, if it's like at night and I just want to jam, like, I can keep that amp super low while my kid's sleeping, and like she doesn't even know that I'm playing. I mean, I'll play sometimes while people are watching TV, just really low, and enough to kind of stand in front of the amp and I can hear it, and it doesn't really bother anybody else. So it's nice to have that. Just, it's always there. It's always plugged in. It's ready to go. And I had that, and I had the JC40, and I always wanted a Fender twin, like a real Fender twin. But I'm like, I can't do a tube twin because it's just way too heavy and way too loud. So I'm like, I really like the Tone Master series. I like them. The Deluxe wasn't bad, but I felt like it could be better. Like, there was something missing. It wasn't exactly like my Tube Deluxe, but it was close enough. And honestly, I never turned the Tube Deluxe up loud enough to hear it distorted. So being able to get distortion out of that amp was actually kind of cool, because you could actually get distortion out of it. But, so then I was like, well, I always wanted a twin, so why don't I go with the Tone Master twin? Because those got pretty good reviews, and I couldn't really decide whether I wanted the blonde one that came with the Celestians or the regular one that came with the Jensens. But I'm like, I want that Fender sound. I want the Fender tone. So I decided to go with the the one that I've used in many of my videos already, which was the regular one with the Jensens, the neodymium Jensens actually is what's in it, but for the weight, so it's lighter. But they sound great, and I love it. And I gotta say, right now I have no desire to buy another amp. Yeah, I want more pedals, maybe another guitar. I don't know, but right now I'm pretty happy with everything I have. I keep saying, well, would I want something else? I've been thinking that I want to try to get some of those Universal Audio pedals. The UA, I want the Ruby, and maybe the Dream, which is a deluxe reverb, because I hear those sound really good recorded and direct. But honestly, I probably don't need the Dream, being that I have the Tone Master twin, and I can run out direct from the back, and that has IRs. It probably sounds a lot like what the Dream sounds like if you're going direct. Close enough, anyway. And in conclusion here, I had the tubes. I had the tube amps. Multiple tube amps. And for me personally, I always ran into a situation where I found them either too loud, or I started to have issues with the tubes. And I wasn't knowledgeable enough at dealing with the tubes. And in this area, there are a few places you can go that have guitar techs, but I don't want to bring anything to Guitar Center because I don't really trust the techs at a Guitar Center. I don't think the techs at a Guitar Center know any more than I do. And so, I mean, if I can do it, why am I going to bring it to them? There's a few places I could bring it to, but they're always backed up because there's only a couple of places. So I'm like, I don't want to deal with this, having to drop it off at a tech and not having my amp for a freaking month and then getting it back and having to pay all this money. Like, just get a couple of solid state amps that can do basically what I want them to do and use some pedals, and there you go. If you're living in a small apartment like this, like I do, and you do a lot of recording, and even if you're going to play out live, there are other alternatives to tube amps nowadays. Maybe they don't sound exactly the same. There's a slight difference in the sound. But I've kind of realized that I came from solid state amps. Like, I started with a PV Bandit. I was playing a crate. Like, all my early amp experience is with solid state amps, not tube amps. So I think I developed my style and I learned how to play using a solid state amp. So when I play a tube amp, even though it feels great and it plays really well, it's a little bit foreign to me. To me, solid state is what I'm used to, and that's what I learned how to play on, and it feels right to me, The immediacy of solid state, I think I'm okay with. But what's kind of nice is you get something like the Fender Tone Master Twin now, and even these Katanas, they're emulating that tube amp sag a little bit. So you are getting a bit of that tube amp feel. I don't think I need the 100% tube amp feel. I think a little bit of it is enough for me to get that feeling when you're playing. So there it is. There's my amp story. I've been saving this one for a while. Wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but it's more of a talky thing anyway, and you get some photos here and there probably. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get something out of the story. I hope you like listening to me ramble on and on. If you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, like the videos. I guess that helps if you like the videos. That's cool. It definitely helps me to get subscribers. And watch my videos if you like them. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody watching my stuff. It's great to actually have people paying attention to what I'm talking about. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm Jay Byrne. This has been the Effects Loop. I hope you enjoyed my amp journey, and I'll see you next time.